Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Joe, Niola, and I are going to be having a discussion about the Bernie Sanders campaign, about primaries, about caucuses, about all things of that nature. And a quick reminder that, in Connecticut, your date's passed. If you haven't gravitated from being an unaffiliated voter to the Democratic Party in order to vote in April 26th primary, Democratic Party primary, it's done. I hope you've done it. I hope you've gravitated over and affiliated, at least for the sake of voting in a primary. In Connecticut, you...
Okay, I got it.
Oh, okay.
No, flip it. We can't have it out plain view.
Okay.
Yeah, let's
Is it on? We're running?
Okay. Well, okay.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. There we are. Okay. Okay. So, at any rate, hopefully you've gone and gone online in the Connecticut Secretary of State site and switched over. If you haven't, then keep it in mind for future elections, because in order to vote in a primary, you have to be affiliated with a party. And but the primaries and the caucuses in Iowa, in a few days, we've got a caucus coming up, and it's important. Well, it's close.
We have a caucus in Iowa. Mm-hmm. We have another one coming up, right, in, Nebraska?
Nevada's got a caucus.
In Nevada. And then eventually, I think there's one in South Carolina.
South Carolina is a primary. And then on March 1st, which is now referred to as Super Tuesday, that is it's a series of, I don't have the exact figure, but there are many primaries that day in many states. And
could you just try and define or explain caucus, primary, just so that our viewers can have an idea of exactly what these things mean? Because people know that these caucuses are going on. They know that there are polls that were taken that would indicate that certain candidates are ahead of others, but those are just polls. Now, what exactly is a caucus?
Well, let's start off with what a poll is, because polls are conducted using, hopefully using good statistical analyses and statistical methods, taking a random sample of voters to determine how effective. If a company or a media outlet is doing a poll, they're trying to predict. They're taking a snapshot of that given moment and where candidates stand versus each other at that given moment. So polls are always subjective and subject to change, but in order to be statistically relevant and statistically accurate, they have to, the poll taker will first of all find somebody on the telephone, and they'll know who that person is off of voting records, and they'll ask them some questions about different things leading up to the actual poll that they're taking. They'll try to determine political party and a number of other things, profession, age group, income, things of that nature, family size, to try to get a sense of who that person is before they actually get to the polls, because they want to have a broad and statistically accurate representation of the people that they're polling.
They want a broad sampling of people.
They want a broad sampling, but they want the sampling to be representative of the people that are going to actually vote in the primary or in the caucus coming up. And the reason why they like to get them right is because they're going to be selling their business, in the case of companies that do statistical polling. They want to be accurate because they want people to come to them later on and say, oh, they were accurate, they know what they're doing, and they'll hire them to do a poll for a product, for any of a number of things.
So the outcome of the caucus is going to be a a very beneficial factor in their ability to continue polling,
and to get outside business, because each candidacy, all the different candidacies, all the different camps on either side of the political spectrum, on either party, they all have their internal polling, and internal polling from a political party or from a candidate is probably going to be questions that are more stilted, more directed toward making their candidate appear better. Which brings us on to a different subject, push polling. Push polling is something that the campaigns have done in the past in order to generally amp up support for their candidate or to denigrate their opponent. And a classic example of that was in 2000 in South Carolina, where George W. Bush and John McCain were the two top candidates. And Karl Rove, on behalf of the Bush campaign, did what was called push polling. And they would call people up, and they would have folks that had South Carolina-sounding accents, so to give the idea that these are local folks that are representing you, asking you these questions. And they would ask McCain supporters and Bush supporters the following question. Now, if you knew that John McCain had adopted a black baby, would you be more likely or less likely to support him? Now, background on that is John McCain and his wife had adopted Vietnamese children. So they weren't black, but to people that they were looking to flesh out,
they were assuming
those people didn't care.
They were assuming that they could possibly exploit the biases of individuals being polled in order to skew their polling toward one of the candidates.
Yeah, in that case, they wanted to make John McCain look bad. They wanted to make him look out of touch with South Carolina Republican voters. And by doing that to amp up the chances of George W. Bush, it was apparently a successful poll because there was an effect of people gravitating from McCain, voting for McCain in South Carolina, to voting for George W. Bush. But it's the type of thing you do in a push poll.
Doesn't sound to be very.
Is it on the up and up? Is it?
Well, it's unfair to begin with because it's manipulating people's and exploiting their biases. I mean, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, biases is something that you're trying to overcome, not exploit.
Yeah, absolutely. They wanted to put an impression on John McCain that would motivate voters to not vote for John McCain in their state primary.
It wasn't a clean poll.
No, it's a poll. It's a poll looking for a decided. They have an objective. It's not unbiased. It's not an unbiased poll by any means.
I think they do that with survey questions as well, don't they? They'll occasionally put certain questions in there that would lead certain individuals toward formulating ideas that would eventually cause them to have an opinion that perhaps the pollers are looking for.
And that's push polling. But again, back to actual statistical polling, which is done fairly and accurately with questions leading up to the question of who are you supporting, who are you leaning towards, which candidate. Those polls are done in a scientific fashion. They want to get a broad representation by race, by age group, by income level. They want to get a broad cross-reference of voters or potential voters to get a good idea about, at that moment, who's supporting whom, which candidate has X amount of support, all the candidates.
From the polling, I believe they are of the opinion that Hillary Clinton pretty much has is in a stronger position with regard to the black and Hispanic votes.
That seems to be the opinion of pundits. Most pundits is that is that they're looking at now that Bernie Sanders.
Well, you said pundits, and I was talking polling. Now,
okay, well,
is it both, or is it pundits getting it from the polling, or the pundits just punditing and it has nothing to do with the polling?
I think it's pundits just formulating an opinion on talk shows, trying to amp up a candidate whom they support, amp up her chances of doing well later on down the road, and also to make, for instance, to make Iowa and New Hampshire seem less relevant. Because Iowa used to be extremely relevant to the Clinton people, to Clinton supporters, when she was doing well there. Now that it appears Bernie Sanders is doing very well there, and in fact is pulled a little bit ahead of her in random polling, they're trying to make Iowa and New Hampshire look less relevant. And of course, in New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders, recent polls show between 10 and 20% lead over Hillary Clinton. So they're trying to shift. They're trying to put down, if you will, the validity of New Hampshire and Iowa, and focus more on South Carolina. Which is which they've now. Which the Clinton camp has now designated as what they call a firewall. So if she loses to Bernie Sanders in Iowa and New Hampshire, then South Carolina is where they want to sort of put the past behind them and restart the campaign.
I guess they're projecting a victory in South Carolina.
And the polls seem to be showing that, although the polls are moving gradually in the direction of Bernie Sanders, where Clinton at a couple of months ago, or even a month ago, had 10, 20, about 30% lead in South Carolina. And now that lead has dwindled down to about a 20% lead, and the trend is toward Bernie Sanders as voters in South Carolina and Democratic Party voters in South Carolina tend to be, on average, more African American than other states. South Carolina is Democratic Party.
So if the pundits are saying that she has the African American vote over Bernie Sanders, people that are not too aware of what's going on may conclude that she is the individual that the African Americans should be voting for. Interesting, isn't it? And then on the other hand, I would think that it might embolden Bernie Sanders supporters to turn out heavily.
Well, it also emboldens Bernie Sanders supporters and it gives them the notion that they should be out in South Carolina, reaching out to everybody, but also, of course, reaching out to the African American community to let them get to know Bernie Sanders a little bit better.
I think the African American community and the Hispanic community are becoming much more aware of Bernie Sanders and what his message is. I think the Hispanic community is very much interested in immigration reform, and that has been a part of his agenda. And I think they're catching on to that. And there are some black celebrity figures, particularly in the hip-hop movement, who are very strong Bernie Sanders supporters. And those are the kind of individuals that attract young eligible voters. And there's a significant amount of those that can make or break Bernie's chances of becoming the Democratic candidate. So it is intriguing. But I'm going to call you again. Just a couple of sentences on this whole caucusing business.
Yeah.
And what's going on there when these people go into these caucusing halls, what they do and what happens, and what's the situation when there aren't sufficient representatives of a particular candidate, and what happens to those to those supporters?
Okay, by rule, in the Iowa caucus, you go to your precinct,
right,
where you would normally go to vote. And rather than vote, you caucus. You get together, everybody comes in, they close the doors at a certain time, because that's the time frame for coming in. The registrar gives the rules to all the people, for those of them that haven't caucused before. So everybody knows the ground rules. And the ground rules are that they separate, in the case of the Democratic Party, they separate out into groups for individual candidates. So you'll have Bernie Sanders supporters who go to this. You'll go to that part of the gymnasium, for example.
Right.
Hillary Clinton supporters, you'll go to that side of the gymnasium. Martin O'Malley supporters will go to this part of the gymnasium.
Right.
Okay. If your candidate in your individual caucus, if your candidate does not have 15%, that's the threshold. You have to have 15% to count. If you do not reach that threshold, if you've got anything less than 15%, and this is going to be important for O'Malley supporters, because I think there will be a lot of precincts where O'Malley does not have 15%. If you don't have 15%, you have two choices. You can either go to one of the other candidates to join their group and amp their numbers up, or you can go home. You don't have the option of staying with your candidate at that point if you haven't met that threshold. So this is...
and then, depending on who has the largest percentage, would come out ahead in the caucus.
Right.
But are there some kind of delegates or some sort of representatives of the precinct now that have to...
the same way that we have an electoral college.
Oh, it's an electoral college.
The same way as we have an electoral college in the United States, you don't. It's not one vote, one person, one vote representation. You have a potential number of delegates from each caucus, depending upon the number of voters in that precinct, and you're representing you're the voters for your candidate, presumably. If you don't have 15%, as I say, you've got two choices. You can either gravitate to another candidate, and usually what happens is the candidate will speak to their representative, their chief representative of their group prior to the caucus, and not tell them certainly, but suggest if you don't have 15% in the caucus, you might want to consider going to that candidate or that candidate. So what I'm thinking is, and I think it's a fairly well thought out, and it's sometimes turns out to be what we expect, and sometimes it doesn't. Thinking back to 2004, a fellow by the name of Dennis Kucinich from Ohio was a candidate, and he did not get 15%. Well, I don't know if he did. He may have gotten 15% in some caucuses, but probably in the majority of them he did not. So we had thought, as Howard Dean supporters, that since Dean and Kucinich were most closely aligned on the issues, that Kucinich would suggest to his caucus goers that they gravitate to the Dean group. When in fact what happened was Kucinich advised and asked his folks to, if he didn't get 15% in an individual caucus, that they go to John Edwards.
Interesting.
And that's part of why John Edwards ended up in second place in Iowa, rather than John Kerry first, John Edwards second, Howard Dean third. And that, as we know, took a lot of the wind out of the Howard Dean campaign. But at any rate, sometimes things go the way you expect, and sometimes they don't. But my thinking is that probably Martin O'Malley, who's definitely closer aligned to Bernie Sanders than he is to Hillary Clinton, at least in the debates, he's been much more complimentary of Bernie Sanders and his policies.
You seem to be in accord a lot more. I see where you're going on that. It would just stand to reason that those O'Malley votes would go to Sanders.
That is what I am thinking, but again, it's only a suggestion. The candidate cannot tell their people what to do. They can only suggest who they align with if you don't have 15% in your caucus.
And you would get all those delegates in that particular precinct if you did win it.
Some of your delegates, some of your voters might go to one, some might go to the other. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go as a group one way or the other. But I'm thinking that probably Bernie Sanders will get more of those voters than Hillary Clinton will, and consequently that'll give Bernie Sanders a little bit of a leg up in that caucus, where O'Malley doesn't have that 15% threshold. But we don't know. We'll find that out. That's all something that'll be probably discussed after the fact, and we'll see how that plays out. But a lot of states most states have actual voting. They'll have primaries.
Oh, that's just another process.
Yeah.
It depends on the state how they want to handle.
Yeah. Connecticut's a primary, and you'll go like you go to vote normally. If you're a registered member of the Democratic Party on voting day, which is April 26th there, you go to the polls and you cast your vote. If you're a registered Republican, then you go to the polls and you vote in the Republican primary. Unaffiliated voters in Connecticut, sorry, if you haven't affiliated, you're out of luck.
Does that work in New York as well and a lot of other states?
New York, I think, has a later date for affiliating. I think there's more flexibility there in terms of how soon before their primary. I don't know.
But it appears that the bottom line is in order to vote in the primary, you either have to be a Democrat, or in the Republican primary, you have to be a Republican.
Except in New Hampshire and some other states. But New Hampshire is a classic example. And New Hampshire voters go through this every 4 years when they have primaries, because quite often on one side of the aisle, either the Democrat or the Republican will have they'll have a person in office. They won't really be having a primary because, as in 2012, President Obama was the incumbent president. He was the candidate. That was settled. So what New Hampshire voters can do, Democratic, unaffiliated, or Republican, or any other minor party, they can go and vote in either primary that they choose to.
That sounds very interesting.
So quite often you'll see voters, you'll see skewed results in New Hampshire, because you'll find that, for instance, in 2004. George W. Bush was the incumbent president, no Republican primary. Well, there was, but nobody wanted to waste their time voting in that. So what they would do is they would go into the polling place, and Betty, and I guess all of the registrars of voters in New Hampshire are named Betty, or at least it seems that way. They go in, and Betty says to them, now you go ahead and you vote in whichever primary you want to, and on your way out, make sure you reaffiliate you can reaffiliate with a party that you came in as. So you can come in in the case of 2004 in New Hampshire, you could come in as a Republican voter. You can vote in the Democratic primary by filling out the form. And on the way out, you can reaffiliate with the Republican Party. So it's kind of interesting there. This time around, it's different because both parties have both primaries in New Hampshire, the Democratic primary and the Republican primary, are both wide open. So you're probably going to see people pretty much vote the way they want to. Independent voters will go whichever one they want to go to, but that independent has become, I think, somewhat of a misnomer, in that people are disaffected with politics in general, or don't want to identify themselves. They don't really appreciate the importance of the primaries. I mean, because they can vote in the general election. This is true, but they don't. They say, "Well, I'm an independent," not necessarily because they're independent. They might be Republican, they might be Democrat, but they call themselves independent because they want to feel independent, even though their thoughts are with one party or the other. But not being able to express your opinion in the primary then leaves you with the candidate which may not be that of your choice. Now, that candidate may not be the candidate of your choice, even if you are voting in the primary. But at least you can say to yourself, "I did my part." Yeah, and a lot of people do that. And we've talked at length in our other shows about talking about Bernie Sanders supporters. We've talked at length about how, and the folks we've had on, a lot of them, in fact, I think all of them, just about, are people who in the past have voted And that's pretty much what they've done. Their civic involvement only goes as far as actually voting in elections.
But that's
But our folks have been. But the folks we've had in have been neophytes, newbies, if you will, to actually being part of and supporting a political campaign, which is exciting.
Well, the thing that troubles me right now, I may be talking to some young people, and it's like, hey, you're going to vote. I mean, I'm not even pushing my candidate. I'm just, are you going to vote?
Yeah.
And the response I get is, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I might not. Or, oh, I don't think so. I'm not interested. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute now. You live in a country where, people have fought and died for this freedom. Where are you? What's happening here? Were you properly educated in school? Don't you realize the importance that goes with a democracy, elections, voting? This troubles me. We've got a certain kind of disinterest, a lack of engagement on a part of our youth. And then you look on the other side of the spectrum and you see our adversary, currently called ISIS, who has a very successful campaign recruiting young people, and they're gung-ho about this new caliphate that they think they're going to be able to establish someplace in the Middle East. I mean, when you compare their engagé to the ennui that exists with some of our young people, you kind of scratch your head and say, who's going to win this in the end?
Political involvement is a very interesting subject. We're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit further. We're going to continue the discussion, and folks in the audience might in fact have some questions for us, and we'll take those and we'll discuss those for tomorrow midday. This is Progressive. So we're going to continue the discussion as we fade out. We'll go a little further about the